So we're going to jump into our first module today. So again, this is about, are we ready, willing, and able to undertake this kind of work? Where are our governments in that journey? And then how do we get from here to there using the toolkit that's been provided as part of this work? So I'm handing it over here to Adam Perry, who's going to take us through this component.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Harmony can. Great. Thanks for that introduction, Harmony. It's a little difficult to not present to an audience because I like to see feedback. So I know Harmony is doing a great job. So my name is Adam Perry. I work for the Nisga'a Nation. I'm an employee of the Nisga'a Nation for the last 5 years. And my role there is to work a lot with data and to sort of support the different departments through the journeys as they take it to collecting appropriate data, making funding decisions, perhaps thinking about performance measurement and what that means, and just trying to put in front of the executive and elected leaders the right kind of information for them to discuss and make decisions. I'd say we're a data-informed government, so data often moves up the chain of command, going through certain channels of executive, senior management to executive, and then ultimately the executive and others implement the projects, and the various departments implement on the projects. So we'll get into how that reflects to assessment today. A couple things just before we get, I have a few slides just to contextualize where assessments are placed in terms of strategy and management. And I think that might help and build off the previous speaker and going forward. So I also sit as a member of the Data Steering Committee, part of the collaborative fiscal policy process, and happy that we were able to bring resources together to support people and support teams, consultants, and other officials from different governments, the technical folks, to really build this platform out. And the goal here really is to build a supportive network for your nations and for your Indigenous governments. Harmony, I'm like you, I use nations as well as self-governing Indigenous governments, and I think most people do use nations. At the end of the day, this is really about self-determination and putting in place governments where they need to manage the land and take care of the people as they see fit. I was really happy to see the turnout. We were perhaps expecting 4 or 5 people and just to be speaking to ourselves, so I'm glad yesterday to hear that 80 or so people were there. And again, we really want to learn together and build out our networks and support. We know Indigenous governments and nations contribute to rural economies. They're drivers of social and economic benefit to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. I just see a comment from that we don't use nations, and it's the Nazi government. So there is a lot of difference too in how this works. So that's helpful, Belinda. Thanks. And I heard, I've heard Gwen speak. She's very inspirational, and I'm really glad she was able to come out and be our first speaker. I think that's really important for how we brainstorm and how we think about the context we work in, just as Belinda raises, and I work for the Nisga'a Nation, right, as a modern treaty and self-government. There's nuances and differences in the context and the cultures we work. So it's really important to learn and take from these webinars what you can in terms of morphing it and adapting it to the specific needs of your people and citizens. Okay, I think I'll start. I'm just on the title, so I might go over. So Harmony, keep me on track. But the title really captures a lot of the work. If I just go back to the title just for a sec. So I titled it Planning Assessments and Data and Decisions. We're really after decisions, but it can be quite a stressful journey to know what data to collect, how to collect it. We're overworked. We're sometimes managing many files on the side of our desk. So really, I titled this, I'm stressed already when we talk about this. And I think for a lot of people at the government level and the departmental level, wearing many hats, we can get stressed out when we think of change management and planning and strategy. So you're not alone in that quest. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'll run through this quickly. Obviously, with governance and Indigenous governments, there's a context of accountability we all have to work in. We have funding relationships, so we have to think about the accountability on a few levels, what that means to our citizens, but what that means to the funders and that sort of thing. Across that, data becomes important. There's also, as Harmony mentioned, how do you think of performance and data and how the government's doing well in terms of the context of the culture, the sacred, the spiritual, and the family. Different performance measurements may be very different to what we're having to report up to Canada for versus what our elders may think is important to consider in terms of data. So keep this in mind. This is why this webinar was brought together. It's really to try to, again, build our understanding of the different dynamics and the play. We often live in hybrid worlds, or we take on different identities as we walk through modern and global world today. So we have to think of these aspects related to change management, collecting data, and the use of it for decisions. There's the private and public spheres that we work in. We're collecting data from citizens. We have to think about ownership and control, not just from the government level, but also what does that have a bearing on the person who's giving that data? Can they get access to it? And I know that's a conversation within the Nisga'a Nation, particularly in collecting individual data, considering that. So there's later seminars, we'll talk maybe about privacy. And as we work with the assessment aspects of this work, we have a section in there which will look at these components. So why are we here today? We're going to look at assessments, taking stock. Assessments, as Harmony say, it's a part of the overall planning, taking stock of where you are, getting a good sense, finding that benchmark or that assessment of where things are to build forward a strategy or an idea of next steps. I've thrown in a bunch of literature from the public administrative side. So there's a body of work that's out there related to governance and governments, local governments, not often in the Indigenous context, of course. But there's some good insights built over the last 30 years around trying to build out better programming and making departments and governments more robust in how they strategize and think to informing key decisions. One thing coming out of that is human resources are critical. Obviously, we know that that's very much grounded in culture too, and the Indigenous context. Families, people matter, right? And human resources matter. So that's a big part of assessing, do we have capacity in-house? Do we have the right human resources? And are the human resources working effectively together as teams? So we'll look at that. There's often many varied interpretations and debates about assessments too. My assessment might be different than Harmony's assessment, and that's okay. If you can use a tool sometimes to get a bunch of opinions, you do get some. If generally everyone agrees that this is the issue versus this, then you probably know that there's an issue on this level of assessment. But of course, debate and discussion is encouraged when we do assessments and analyze the results. So as we look at the assessment tool, I'd encourage you not just to think of one person in the government to take this, but multiple people. And there may also be some discussions about how you use this tool at the departmental level or at the senior government level. So you'll have to navigate through that. We probably won't have time to go into all the nuances of that tool, but I hope that you'll work with your support teams and networks, and you can always reach out to us as the Data Steering Committee and others if the tool doesn't quite sit or you have some challenges with that. At the end of the day, we're really trying to set priorities, take action, and plan for future-oriented decisions. And I've just the last point, and then you'll have time to look at this slide in the detail in it at a later time. But really, the key is, again, I want to stress why we do some of these assessments is really to impart on the people who make key decisions some of the challenges and problems we may be facing, and then how do we think we can address that for the better? Okay, next slide, please. Overall benefits of planning and strategy. I'll sort of whip through this. Similar to Gwen's talk, again, it's it's working with teams, it's planning strategy in the context and culture that makes sense. And I'm also tired of output reporting. This idea of output measures, how many or how much is important. We need to know these kinds of things. But I think a lot of times in the overall planning and strategy and taking stock of where you're at, you're really trying to understand the outcomes. What's important? Is the program working? Did it have a longer term impact? There's outputs that can happen at the short term, the midterm, and the longer term impact. So there's this difference again between output measures, something we often do for governments when we have to report up to our funders, and it can be sort of a drag and we just want to get the funder off our backs. So we say so many people took the program and this, so many people did this and so many people did this, and then we leave it. And we probably want to move internally more to thinking about what are the outcomes, right? Did the program have an impact on the family, the individual? And that's some of this work we're trying to build, is some of the understanding of the terminology, but also like, what does it really mean to you in the work that you do at the departmental level for your government, and how does it have an impact for the citizens and people you work with? Often another point around assessments and evaluation of these things, you sometimes are looking at multiple variables, multiple things, and you may have multiple standards of evaluation. So I can think of an example. If I sit before the WSN or the elders or other elected leaders, senior people in the Nisga'a Nation, I'm probably going to think their judgment of what I'm doing and how it's having impact is more important than a funder, a young, recently hired funder from Canada, who's telling me I should have followed the funding agreement like this to a T. Yes, I reported on outputs, but I probably want to look at the outcomes of the program and listen to what elders are trying to say about it. Is it working? Is it not? So, but both evaluation standards are probably important. It's just using multiple standards at different times is the juggling act and sort of the skill set one can develop through getting a better understanding of this work. One thing I'll stress, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, we can. One thing I'll stress is that it takes work. All of this stuff takes work, right? Important part again is the assessments. Put a quote up there from Carol-Ann Tomlinson. Assessment is today's means of modifying tomorrow's instructions. Okay, and then I have a little cartoon there from which I found I thought was pretty funny. I'm going to need more specific feedback on my formative assessments, and it just says bad dog. So oftentimes, assessments are only as good as people dig into them and use them and start to work with them. It's not a shaming or name blaming, or this department wasn't working effectively, or the government's not working effectively, or that person. Really, it's like let's assess where we're at so we can think about how to move forward and what a person or department or government might need to actually improve upon that. What are the challenges and how do we address that? And it's really taking a bit of that stance with it. So I do like that cartoon. I don't know. I've been called a bad dog sometimes too. But anyways, okay. So through another example in there of assessments are throughout many organizations, right? It's not just in governments, organizations, not-for-profit, businesses take assessments, sports teams, educational schools do assessments. We can think back to the early assessments in report card, the first report card you took home. I'm being assessed. I didn't do so good. So you assess your home finances. You assess your health. Your doctor says you need to monitor and assess your blood pressure. So there's a lot of literature about how to do assessments and performance measurement that we can tie on. Again, take it in the context where we're at. I picked up this one from the Olympics, the Professional Olympic Sports, some key points from an author here. Continual assessments are important. So not just doing one assessment at one point in time, but doing an assessment, making remedial changes, trying to address it, and then doing a further assessment to see how improvement was made, to determine best practice. An athlete might find that they're not getting enough sleep, so they're pushing too hard. So in the assessment before, their performance dropped, and they made some changes. They got better sleep. They changed their diet. They assessed again, and their performance went up. Again, this is all about making informed decisions and driving decisions. Okay, next slide, please. Again, so what's some of the literature saying around planning and strategy related to assessments and such? Well, that it takes multiple actors to make really effective outcomes for government. It's not just about relying on technical people. It's not just about relying necessarily on politicians to lead things. It's a balance, right? And what seems to be coming out of some of the literature is the best and most effective change management that can occur is really when a team is functioning well and there's a lot of relying on people's strengths and weaknesses. Like you build off someone's weakness, you learn from their strengths, but you let different people lead at different times. So it becomes part of a team. So the structures are important. So you might have a structure in government which follows protocols and practices around very strong cultural understandings. Maybe it's a hybrid between understanding hereditary relationships between the matriarch and chiefs. Um, and there's channels for information, but it's flexible and it's innovative to also allow new information to come in and to sort of think through these things. So I wrote, teamwork is critical. Structure, flexibility, and innovation seem to bring the magic. So think of the best sports team when the magic just happens and you don't know why. It could be the coach, it could be the players are all driving, but there's probably some very good synergy in there between the team, right? Some good communication, some important understanding of how to rely on each other in different times. Again, the process will be unique to each respective Indigenous government or nation. And in this case, we're really focused, again, on the Indigenous government structures here. Next slide, please. Assessments in public and private service. You can look at this. I'll go kind of somewhat quickly here. It's a similar modus operandi. I said similar themes come out of if you work in the public sector or the private sector. In governments, we're in public service. These are some of the key things in that literature I said was building on what public administrative data and understanding of how to make governments more effective. Again, assessments, more annual and regular assessments are kind of key in this. Assessments of an organization's capacities and managerial capabilities. Again, the power structures in play, the culture, the leadership, understanding that structure. So power doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. Sometimes people really love clear channels of structure and authority that report up the chain. Some organizations might embrace a bit more of the flexible aspects in their government and seem to find that works. Again, another thing, human resources matter. At the end of the day, people matter in these decisions, and it's really about strategizing on these kinds of effective aspects. And assessments are a critical part of this for performance measurement. So you can look at these. There's a breadth of literature out there. It's not just these few articles I pulled. That's really started, the public administration focus started in the 70s, and a lot of good stuff came out of the United States on that. And obviously Canada, it's morphing that kind of stuff into this, again, the culture and context of how you measure performance from the terms of the Indigenous context, which is a very unique and innovative space to be in right now. And I think for those young people moving up, coming up as young leaders or just needing a job in public service with Indigenous governments, this is a very opportune space and a creative space for young people. So it's exciting. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, focus on assessing your organization's data structures. Again, the self-assessment tool we're going to look at is just one example in many examples of different tools. I imagine we'll gain feedback from this tool. You'll work with your support networks and others to adapt the tool. So this is not by no means is this a definitive or this is the only tool you should use. There's many tools to use. The key takeaway I want to stress just from this preamble here before we get into it is framing data governance and management does connect to overall strategic planning. And it's really, as Harmony sort of laid out at the start, how do you make data effective, right? It's not just about the data, it's how do you make it effective in your overall government structures. And obviously, many tools in the toolkit will lead to success. So we'll turn now to the self-assessment tool. And Allison is going to, and Harmony may jump in here as this was a very much a collaborative effort through the DSC. One thing before, I don't see it yet, but as we pull it up, one thing to note, I think important with this work is we are building our understanding from this body of work and these resources we have available that we've invested to pull in, different people who can support this, technical folks, and we can create some of these tools. There's other resources out there, and Gwen Phillips and others will have regional resources. The federal side, Statistics Canada, will have resources. I can see this work evolving with the website and the toolkit, is that we're just trying to make available some of these external resources and build a network across Canada that really tries to endear that community and family, I guess, of trying to encourage this work, again, for young people coming up who may want a career and a life in public service. So data governance and management self-assessment tool. I did see a chat here. I'm just going to see what that said. Please see here, self-assessment. Okay, this is it. Perfect. So just scroll, if you could scroll down a bit, Allison, just so I can try to read off the intro there. Perfect, thanks. Again, the tool is designed for self-governing Indigenous governments. SGIGs was a new term to me over the last few years, but the SGIG we'll use from now on. Explore the current, this is to really get a grasp of the current, your data governance and management structures, okay? Again, as it relates to sort of planning and decisions you'll make, and probably as you may want to morph this tool or adapt it or take it at different times as you attune to changes or interventions you may make going forward. We structured this in a way to look at high priority needs that you may have, and I'll get into that, and just to really see if these are also important to you, these aspects. So let's just do an overview of the tool itself, Allison. We'll scroll through it and look at the sections we're going to look at. So I'll stop there, just at that, before we do that, just at the column rows. So the questions are obviously in column A, or the first column, and this will be helping you understand the components we're going to assess. We put in a column B as a rationale. It gives you a little bit more descriptive understanding of what you're trying to assess. Then there's a rating scale in column C, the third column, which is, does your government address this fully, somewhat, or not address this? And you would score this by the number. And then there's a priority level to use. So you might say the government addresses this fully. We're taking care of this aspect. So let's just look at visioning as one example. Yes, we have clear visions in the government. It follows, again, maybe the heritage and cultural principles of a nation or area that you work. But it's a low priority. The vision, we don't need to rework our vision statement. The vision's pretty clear. So this to us is a low priority. So that's how it will work. And then the final column relates to where some information can be found on the toolkit. And I'm not sure if we'll have a chance to pull some of that, the website and up. So this will lead you to sections on the website as part of the overall toolkit where you could find out more information and direct your staff or yourselves, if you're interested, to follow up into delving into some of these aspects a little more detailed. And then once you go from there, you can broaden it out to other web resources and such. Okay, so let's go over the sections. So section 1 is visioning of a government. So we'll look at aspects, some components of what we'll assess based on visioning, section 1. Section 2, if we could just scroll down, this would be readiness to build out your data government and management systems, what we're calling, we put in brackets, buy-in. So buy-in is very critical, right? And it's something we often hear at the departmental level, or even as it goes up in senior management and government. We wanted the data, but we couldn't get it because people were busy, or there wasn't buy-in perhaps at that level. But perhaps there's not buy-in at the senior level too, or the elected level. Perhaps people think data shouldn't be prioritized for different reasons. Maybe they don't understand how it's used in the organization. Maybe it's a structural issue of effective strategy. So we've got some questions related there to assess. And you would do this again, either yourselves with your departments, with your senior management, or with some support teams around you. Okay, next section. Section 3. Data governance. So there's some questions here around data governance, what success may look like. Okay, section 4. Information management, which is a critical component of this. How do you store and get access to information over time, historic data? There's lots of things in there. We've asked around that. Okay, section 5. So data policies, processes, and procedures, these are becoming a little more important these days related to privacy issues, as we probably all heard things about Google taking our information and it gets sold off. And these are all issues that become important for Indigenous governments as data is collected from citizens over time. And also, again, how is this thought of? Do you have policies in place and structures and even the infrastructure around your server and where you store these things? Do you have that infrastructure in place? Is it, again, do you rate that a low priority, a high priority? Is it fully addressed or not? Okay, section 6. Okay, human resources. Again, a critical aspect, a theme I've sort of drawn upon is that people are what drive the effectiveness of working towards key decisions. So we've got some questions around human resources. Okay, section 7. And existing data. So this might be how you use the existing data that's collected, either if it's part of your agreements with Canada and the province or territory. Do you leverage that data or not? Or what do you make of that data in relationship to your decisions? And how do you reflect on the outcomes of that data in relationship to what you want to do? Okay, section 8. Or we might be done there. No, section 8. Sorry, section 8 is the scoring. So then there's a kind of some math aspects that we'll have to think about when you score this up. But this again goes to my point about you want to make the assessment a bit more meaningful, and it will take a bit of work to do, right? And while it might be complicated, these are the things to really dig into, because without an effective assessment, you're just really having a superficial understanding of the issues. And you really want to dig into potentially like when I've worked and done some of these assessments, what I thought was the issue actually isn't the issue. After I do the assessments, do it with a few people, score it up, and I see it, I say, oh, actually the issue was here. I might have thought I needed a privacy policy aspect. Actually, my issue is that we've got high staff turnover right now, and data is not becoming reliable because there are too many people rolling in, and there's a capacity issue. So these assessments will really, I think, help in the scoring of some of that. And all it is you would add up the number of high priority needs out of 29 here, and then the subsequent piece below is of those high priority needs, how many have been fully addressed. So you identify, for example, I have 10 high priority needs we've identified. Great. You can have a look at that. Now, how many of those have been fully addressed? Well, if 5 of those 10 high priority needs have been addressed, you may want to target looking at the other 5 that haven't been addressed, bringing your teams together and sort of having a discussion of the real issues and digging into the context of that. Perhaps you make interventions, strategies around addressing those. You run this similar assessment a year later. You find out, we only now have 8 high priority needs and 6 or 7 of those have been addressed. So really, we're still struggling with two of these issues. Again, it's how you use the tool, and you can morph this, adapt this, or use other tools. I think I'm going to pause here and let Harmony or Allison jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, would you also say that it's you have an opportunity to just pick a single section that you know is the priority for your government and maybe kind of work through that?
Absolutely. It's really about, again, this is bringing us together as networks and support teams. And at the end of the day, it's how you use the tools here to make the successful interventions you see fit. So if you already say you have a really good understanding of what's happening at the certain sections there, and you want to focus on another section, for sure.
There's a note or a question in the chat around, is there guidance of what should be high, medium, low priority, or is that determined by the SGIG? I would say in my experience, I think it's a bit of both, in that the SGIG would have their view and their set of priorities and their plan to drive forward. At the same time, there are things like legal requirements and other things that people have to meet with respect to data that also maybe drive kind of the maturity level, so to speak, of where systems are where at, and where there may be priority in investing in certain aspects of the assessment. Is that how you would respond, or do you have thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I would say is the sections that we developed. So the overarching kind of themes related to data governance and management were drawn on a few of key books. I think we initially used a couple books that looked at data governance and had aspects of human resources, information management, using data. So we've tried to break out some key themes based on probably similarities we'd all work with if we had through that we all have to work with as part of data governance and management. But yeah, the priority setting it's sort of arbitrary that we picked a scale of 1 to 3. Some assessments could use a much more detailed assessment, a scale of 1 to 20. So you get a more granular understanding of these issues. But they are somewhat up to you, the Indigenous governments, to really work with. It's your interpretation of what is a high priority, low priority, medium priority. That's really for you. But if you think that the theme and the question isn't even the right question as it relates to these aspects of data governance, management, strategy, or planning, you can add a subsequent question. I mean, it was somewhat difficult to come up with a tool that we thought could be used effectively. The key point is you want to score something in an assessment. You want to have a good understanding of the kind of characteristics that you want to assess, and you want to really work it. So you think about what you're trying to assess. And I think if you start there, you're off to the races.
It would also be useful as folks are reviewing this assessment either today or in kind of the coming weeks, is like give us feedback on whether there's aspects of the assessment that you really want us to unpack in future webinars. So when I look through the assessment, I know, for example, section 2 is on buy-in. Well, today we're going to talk about change management, which should give you some key tools to start to think about, okay, if I don't have kind of buy-in from my colleagues, what are some strategies that I can employ? The sections on data governance, the next webinar we're going to really dig into practical processes around data governance. And there'll be a whole one on data management that will get into a lot of the information management, record keeping, security, all of that important stuff. So as you're going through, like, there are areas where we haven't spent much time. So maybe Allison, if you could actually go up to section 1, like as an example, because we're not really covering this topic at this point yet in the webinars, but if it's something that the group really wanted to do. So for example, if we take section 1, so I'm from Tla'amin. Before I came in today, I was trying to do this assessment from the perspective of Tla'amin, and I had to call my brother and say, does Tla'amin have a vision statement? Like, I don't know, and I'm a citizen, and I'm a member of the nation, what's up with this? And yeah, so he had to kind of educate me and say, like, oh, actually we did. It's from our CCP from 2007, which is well before the effective date of the treaty. Now they're in the middle of a planning process. So this is all stuff that I didn't know. And so it led me to think, well, has the government done visioning? Well, somewhat, right? So they'd probably rate that a 2. Is it a priority? Like, I would say yes, because they're in the middle of a planning process. So that would be like a high priority. And if I was involved, then I could kind of click on that tool and kind of work through. So maybe, I don't know if you can kind of click on that, Allison, and see kind of, does that take us to? So then that takes us to this part of the toolkit. And then, so if I was kind of starting a planning process, then I could pick up some of these practical aspects. We are going to have a webinar, I think it's webinar 5, on indicator development. So we'll be able to start to breathe some life into that toolkit section as well. And again, like in my own nation, I'm quite sure we don't have indicators related specifically to vision. I think they produce a lot of indicators related to their funding agreement. So, you know, it's somewhat addressed, like I said, but it's really probably something that most citizens would say is important to them. And then there's certainly laws on information and privacy that my own government has, but they don't have a vision and principles for data governance specifically. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give that example in my own experience of kind of where my government's at and how I might go about using the tool, but also invite everyone who's participating to give us feedback about, as you think about this assessment, like what would be most helpful for us to spend our time together on and bring experts in, because this webinar series belongs to all of us, so we can certainly evolve and pivot in the coming weeks.
That's great, Harmy. And so I'll just add to that. I think that's a key point. I saw some comments there about not keeping it too focused on the minutia of data management, the IT aspects. Really, this starts with some visioning principles and objectives, right? And that is critical piece. And I think that's why we did structure this as the number one section to look at. But if you don't have some of the guiding light, I mean, the Nisga'a Nation has a constitution, has a focus to improve citizens' overall quality of life. It may not be well defined, so that could be another aspect. You may have aspects of the vision there, but it's not necessarily clearly aligned to some of the strategy documents you have, well-being, focus, and such. So again, that's critical. This is a critical piece to think about how the organization is moving to what objectives, priorities, goals, where do you want to be? And if visioning isn't quite in place, and because as Harmony says, oftentimes there's a legacy of the old ways of reporting up. So doing this kind of work as it relates to accountability for government funding, right? The INAC days, we're self-government has blown that out of the water. So now we have to think about, maybe morphing how we operate as public administrators and as government officials for public service in relationship to many moving parts. And it does start with a clear grounding of the vision, I think. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Harmony. Is there any direction now? We have a few minutes. Do people want to go into the tool, or is there more overarching considerations? I really appreciated, Harmony, that your suggestion that if folks mull on this and think about it, and they want to spend some and make the webinar a bit more, well, we should think of vision and priorities, similar to what Gwen spoke of probably on the first day about how this was so anchoring. Maybe we ask her back to think through some stuff on visioning, perhaps, but I'll stop.
Allison, any closing thoughts? I know you were very hands-on with the assessment tool.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we're also inviting feedback on this tool and the rest of the toolkit. So if after you have a chance to go through this and try to use it, you have some thoughts on how we might improve it, we'd really invite you to send us that feedback.